Hi, my name is Walt DeGrange. Huge fan of Scott's Antinet. I've been a member of the community now going on 3 or 4 months and decided it was time for me to contribute something and kind of pay it back to the community. So my background is I was 21 years Navy and primarily do analytics professionally and for both military and commercial, do some sports analytics. So it's pretty fun stuff. A lot of, matter of fact, I teach analytics online and also have a book coming out here in a few weeks in August. Did not use the Antinet Zettelkasten for that. However, because I was going through the final revisions and everything as I picked up, started developing my Antinet Zettelkasten. It really gave me a really good start to my Antinet. And the other piece of this is that, as I build my new idea bank, this has been an excellent way to do that. So thanks to Scott and the community for helping me get kickstarted on that. With my use case is I love going to conferences. I know the last 2 years we've been very limited going to conferences due to the COVID situation worldwide. They've just really opened up the past year, and my first large conference was the Moore's Operational Research Society, which is an analytics conference specifically for Department of Defense in the United States and with their allies. It was actually at the Marine Corps base up in Quantico, Virginia, in June. And the use case is that when you go to these conferences, there are lots of tracks. It's overwhelming in times. And this one had about 30 tracks, about 800 attendees. And many times most people, and I'm go to a lot of conferences, will put off actually planning like what you're going to do at the conference until the very last minute. And this was pretty much the same. The conference, I was traveling on Monday. The conference was Tuesday to Thursday, and lo and behold, it was Saturday before the conference, and I hadn't really figured out what I was going to do. Then I thought, well, how can the Antinet help me, right? And this entire process. So I just want to go over kind of my process, and I will put this in the notes also. The first off, I said I'm going to have 3 hours. It was Saturday. I'm going to dedicate 3 hours to this. For 2 hours, like many professional societies, Morris has a non peer reviewed journal, magazine called Phalanx, and I basically, this is a quarterly magazine. So I took the last four of these and scanned them, right? So I had 2 hours, and I made bib notes. So the bib notes, you could do a bib note per article if you wanted to. I only did the each issue, and then I made a page number, and then a bib note entry, and then if there was an author involved and everything. So that's how I did this. Now some of these did end up being installed in my Antinet for main notes. But the real advantage of doing this was that I was priming myself, right, to do other things that we'll get into in just a second. The last hour of the 3 hours for that Saturday, Sunday, Morris has webinars and talks, and I went and reviewed some of those, and then again took bib notes and made notes about the time, the title of the presentation or webinar, or the podcast or whatever it was, and then again had those bib notes. Then again, some of those end up being main cards. After that, the next step I did was I reviewed those bib cards, and in some instances, I knew that there were already cards in my system or branches about that. So one example I like to use for this demonstration is bias. Bias is a large issue when it comes to AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning now. Everybody's heard about, the bias data sets and such. I knew I had a branch on that, and so I went to my index. There was an article in one of the Phalanx magazines, and sure enough, if I take a look at my index card, which does not have near as many entries as probably some of yours, for B, it was 1390. So I have a branch in the bias. Again, here's my entire Antinet. It's a pretty thin stack at this point, growing every day. And if I go to 1390 and then just look at the cards around it, that's where the magic happens. So 1390 is its own branch. And here it is. And it's bias. So got that. And then 1391, 1390 slash 1 is the definition of bias. And then 1391 slash 1 is actually the application, of a bias in professional sports for coaches and managers, for them not to trust the math and to, fall back on traditional ways to coach or play a game. The big example of this is, going forward on fourth downs in football, right? Even though the statistics may say that that's a good move, if coaches do it too often, they feel like they could potentially lose the trust of fans and owners and such, and lose their job. That is a perception, of course, with that. So that was one of the cards that was around this bias, that was not connected to any kind of military application. There were other examples of this, and this is something that you could actually put these cards in a smaller deck that you could review. I drove to my conference, so it would have been a lot harder to review these while I'm driving. However, if you're flying or taking a train, or something where you have passenger seat, you could potentially just take these cards, make a small deck, and carry them with you. Wouldn't need a computer or anything. Now, that was the priming piece. How did it help? Next step is I actually went to the agenda and to the schedule and looked at it. Typically, when you do that, there are some talks that you're going to want to go to, right? And some work groups or tracks that have a large application to what you're doing, your day job is. The other piece is, if you're presenting, I actually did do presentation. You have to show up to those too. That's kind of mandatory. It felt easier this time. And again, talking about bias, I'm highly biased because this was the first time I'd ever applied this methodology, that it just seemed easier for me to look at talks, look at keynote speakers, and find things I was interested in. Right. So the actual creation of my conference schedule, I felt, was easier. That was the conference pre-prep. Then I attended the conference. It was Tuesday through Thursday, and I did do bib cards for the conference sessions that I did go to. So you're only carrying around the index cards and a pencil or pen, which is nice. It's light. You don't have carrying around a laptop or an iPad or anything like that. That was one advantage of this. The other piece of it is that even though I did take notes with bib cards, and some of those did result in main cards when I got home and installed it in my Antinet, I felt like if I saw a author or presenter who was presenting on something that I'd already reviewed, that I had those edge connections in the Antinet that I already reviewed, and whenever I had a discussion with somebody, it just seemed to be deeper. And again, this is a sample size of one. However, I really personally felt like I got more out of the conversations, bringing up issues that if I would have just been a spare of the moment, I may not have known or remembered. And so this priming of reviewing the cards and such just resulted in what I considered just much deeper conversations or different conversations. And I believe that a lot of presenters, a lot of the authors really, got into this and really enjoyed engaging at another level, or things again that were on the edge of what they were writing about or trying to communicate, and potentially some different angles to take on it. So that was pretty much the process. Again, I'll just review it real quick. I just reviewed the magazines. I reviewed online webinars. Made bib cards. Did some installation into my Antinet from them, and then reviewed some of the topic areas where I did have main cards already or branches, and just went, a few in front, a few behind, and got the a good overview of what in my Antinet where those edges are, right? What is bias touch, or even different use cases of bias. Then that primed me to do the agenda schedule. I attended the conference, and then had deeper, I felt were deeper conversations, more beneficial conversations with the folks that I engaged with, and also took bib cards of the conference presentations and keynote talks, and some of those were resulted in main notes. I will say this also, that I on the bib cards for the presentations and keynotes, that I did the presentation title, the actual speaker, and any kind of papers or books that they had recommended or referenced in their talk. And then that, when I got back home, that also resulted in me being able to research some of those references, and then creating bib cards for those, which then resulted in main cards for my my Antinet Zettelkasten. And so overall, this really worked well for me. I would say, if I have another big conference coming up in October, I'm hoping, one improvement I'm going to make, and we always make this promise to ourselves, is to start earlier. I need to spread out the time and get this entire process started out a few weeks in advance. And even if I want to put in a couple of hours, spread it out over some time. And that way, it should give me some time to think about, reflect, and make the system just that much more better, right? That much better, more efficient, more beneficial. And I obviously, I don't think you could probably start prepping 6 months out. That may be too far. There is probably some magical Goldilocks zone of 7 days, 14 days. I don't know what the magical zone is, where you start your prep. It takes you just a few hours, and you can actually retain, especially if you're reviewing these main cards, or again, you just keep reviewing them repetitively until the event, and then it will prime you to again to really take advantage of that. Conferences are, with travel and time, that's a lot of investment, and for many of us, it could be your funds, you have to pay for them, or your company pays for them. So these things aren't cheap, and I think I really felt like I got my money's worth and time investment out of that conference. So hopefully this helps. If you have any further ideas, please share. I am a true believer that this community is awesome at, sharing new ideas and such. And if you love conferences as much as I do, then yeah, please, I'd love to hear your feedback on any types of improvements or things that you think, in this process could be done differently that may make it more effective. So thanks to everybody for listening, and I can't wait for the discussion. Thanks.